ABC Listen. Podcasts, radio, news, music and more.
A future made in Australia has a nice ring to it. But is it really wise for the government to throw almost $23 billion at industry as we transition to net zero and a green future? The opposition thinks it will just mean billionaires like Gina Rinehart get richer. Today, the host of ABC Radio National Breakfast, Q&A, and the Party Room podcast, Patricia Karvelas, on what the government's planning and whether the gamble will pay off. I'm Sam Hawley on Gadigal land in Sydney. This is ABC News Daily. PK, there was a time when we used to make stuff in Australia, lots of things actually, but I guess it's cars and the Holden that really still resonates with us, doesn't it?
I think the Holden is the iconic part of the Australian psyche and memory. And, yeah, we made a lot of other things too, but the Holden does represent that in terms of our history.
And in 1948, Prime Minister Chifley launched Australia's own car, Holden. Thus, Australia took a major step forward in its industrial development.
Australia, what's your favourite sport?
Football.
Snack?
Pies.
Animal?
Kangaroos.
And what's your favourite car, Australia?
Holden.
Let me see, that's football, meat pies, kangaroos and Holden cars, huh?
Right.
Well, you sure sound like Australia to me.
We are.
It was a different world, though. It was also propped up by billions of dollars in subsidies and, of course, huge tariffs, which meant that bringing in some of these things from overseas was expensive. And that's how we also competed through these artificial trade barriers, which the world tried to tear down and opened up our own economies. But manufacturers really struggled to compete with the cheap imports from particularly Asian countries, China most obviously. My uncle worked in the car industry. My mother worked in the textile clothing and footwear industry. These were iconic parts of our childhoods, but they have gone. And it wasn't just cars. Manufacturing has declined across the board because we are unable to compete with cheaper imports. And we've radically accepted that and really lent into the fact that we've become a services economy. And so it's not like everyone laments it. Some people accept that it's part of change.
So we really did stop making a lot of things in this country, and as you mentioned, it became so incredibly costly to do it. There was so many government subsidies going out. So there's various reasons for why we stopped. But now, PK, the Australian government wants us to start making things again through this Future Made in Australia initiative.
Our $22.7 billion Future Made in Australia package will help make us an indispensable part of the global net zero economy, a crucial part of a growth agenda, which is all about attracting investment in key industries, making our country a renewable energy superpower, strengthening our defence capabilities.
Making things is part of it. Apparently, according to the government, we're going to be a renewable energy superpower, which sounds pretty exciting.
It sounds really cool if we can pull it off. So now the Albanese government, aware of the fact that we don't have a carbon price, we do need to decarbonise, that we do need to create the sort of energy of the future, which means we've got to do risky things that don't necessarily have a commercial base yet or a future. So in this budget, that's really their centrepiece. And right now, we're seeing that this is the biggest fight in this budget too. This one, the coalition will oppose. So that's $22.7 billion over 10 years, federal policy to bring back industrial subsidies, which we thought were something of yesteryear, but in fact, there's a new move towards them across the world. The government tries to present this as a way to create the jobs of the future. And I do think that's compelling because we know that there's going to be a radical reduction of jobs through decarbonisation. So what they're trying to say here is we've got an answer on that.
Yeah, right. So it's a lot of money, $22.7 billion over 10 years, as you say. The Prime Minister and the Treasurer, They're pretty excited about this. They see this as our future. And, of course, you've had Anthony Albanese on your breakfast show.
I think this is the one that they really want to lean in on, and this is going to shape the future election cycle as well. We will have an election next year, and given this one is a policy that the opposition opposes and the opposition sees nuclear as the future, watch this space.
So it effectively is an incentive payment for new industries, in this case hydrogen and critical minerals, to set Australia up for the future.
Now, there's two streams to this. There is a national security stream, and then there is the kind of green energy stream. Green energy stream, I mean, the opposition's opposed to all of it, but I don't think that's as contentious. Big money for hydrogen, basically it's a tax incentive for production. The opposition paints it as money going to billionaires, and there's no doubt that probably billionaires will get a tax advantage, but it's about commercialising this stuff.
Gina Rinehart's already got some money out of this, apparently.
Yeah, earlier this year the government invested, $840 million in the Arafura Rare Earths. It's a company backed by Gina Rinehart to develop a rare earth refinery.
Yes.
But either way, we seem to, not quite politically, but at least in the business community, have a consensus that some of this is important. The contentious other national security part is rather contentious because that's giving subsidies to solar panels and to batteries, and that's a bit more contentious.
So let's unpack that further. So we want to, start manufacturing our own solar panels because, of course, China really dominates this market at the moment, doesn't it?
95% or something, isn't it?
Yeah, huge.
That's my memory.
It's huge, yeah.
Huge, right, yes. Now, I put that to the Prime Minister because if there's a Treasury paper on this, they gently, in a Treasury kind of way, basically suggest that money on that element for things like that could be spent somewhere else. And that's because if you're an economic purist, of course the money is not best spent there. The Prime Minister has started finally, and I think this is smart politics, by the way, explaining this a bit better because I thought it was not well explained. And when I put it to him, he explained the fact that this is about our sovereignty.
I'll tell you what's a good use of money is recognising that there are not just industry policy objectives, that it's also a national interest test. And when you have more than 90% of the world's solar panels that will help to power the global economy produced in one country, then that leaves us vulnerable.
Look what happened during COVID when all our supply chains got, clogged up. We want to not have to be reliant on a country like China. And so that kind of explains it if you take it out of the pure economics.
We're also going to throw a heap of money at building a quantum computer in Brisbane.
Yeah, now this one again has been contentious. The opposition very critical of why we're giving $1 billion to this. Now they claim that they're the world's first useful quantum computer, a device basically helpful for people who don't know what these do, for applications like cracking codes, discovering new materials and drugs, modelling climate and weather. Like they're amazing, but there have been criticisms and pretty strong ones from the opposition that grant just doesn't meet the national test that the government's setting up. Did it go through a proper process? These are, again, important questions, and that's where some of the tension is around all of this.
Yeah, because we're talking about a huge amount of taxpayers' money. Just back on that Gina Rinehart issue, or I guess some of this money going to very rich Australians. Of course, that's what Peter Dutton has jumped on, hasn't he? He said he's not happy and he doesn't want to see billions and billions of taxpayer dollars go to billionaires.
What 15 billion for billionaires to dig minerals out of the ground. I think we should be helping, frankly, Australians who are struggling at the moment to find a house. We've got people living in cars and in tents.
He says that, right?
Nothing to say about that yesterday.
But it's. I find it funny that the coalition is using the language of class warfare that they hate or they criticise when it's used by Labor. We live in a capitalist economy, right? We have billionaires. better be careful about talking about billionaires because they might need billionaires.
Yes, exactly. And a lot of this package, PK, is about critical minerals. And you also mentioned hydrogen. Something like $6.7 billion will go to hydrogen. So, interestingly though, PK, the Greens also have a problem with this plan.
The Greens have a problem in the government's investment and support for fossil fuels.
Why should the Greens work and pass legislation that cuts pollution if Labor's going to then undo it the next day by opening new coal and gas mines that'll run past 2050 and wipe out all of those climate gains? The government's got to pick a lane.
And now they're going to be really key. So Peter Dutton has essentially, by opposing this Future Made in Australia plan, handed over a lot of power to the Greens, who the government will have to negotiate with to get this through the Senate. Their criticism is that the government's basically two-faced on climate change, that they are not taking fossil fuels out of our economy fast enough, that they are subsidising fossil fuels, and they want to make that argument as they negotiate. But, numbers are numbers, so they're going to have to strike a deal.
Yeah, okay. And if this doesn't get through the Parliament, what happens? Does this $22.7 billion just go elsewhere, does it?
Well, it's not till 2027 that it kicks in.
Right.
What happens is that the government, and this is my supposition, but a pretty educated one on this one, will take it to the election. I reckon they'll probably be able to get it through the Parliament, though.
Okay. All right. Well, of course, PK, there really is an argument that all of this sort of stuff should just be left to the private sector, that you don't need to splash taxpayer money around on this sort of thing. In fact, a lot of economists think it's a really bad idea, and even the chair of the Productivity Commission, Danielle Wood, isn't that keen on the idea.
We know from our experience in industry assistance in the 70s and early 80s, once you create a class of businesses that are reliant on government subsidies, they become very good at coming back and putting the case for more. So what starts as kind of an infant industry argument, your infants grow up, they turn into very hungry teenagers, and it's kind of hard to turn off the tap.
Again, remember that point I made, and I absolutely respect Danielle, but the advice she's providing is an economic piece of advice, which is absolutely accurate. But again, that's why I explained that the government's interest here is not just purely economics. So she says that instead of trying to compete with others like the US who are making this massive industry subsidies, Australia should be taking advantage of their free money by buying their products cheaply.
Look, I have raised concerns about it. One view of the world is when other countries subsidise their production, we say thank you very much. That means, lower prices for Australian consumers. Where that relates to
Okay. And I guess then, PK, ahead of the election next year, the government just really needs to convince voters that this is a good way to spend their money.
Yeah, and there's a lot to argue for them. This has the ingredients of something that could be really sold, I think. But it's all in the selling. And I do think Australians are pretty smart. They know that the fossil fuel industries are in decline. That's something we know as fact, right? And so people want also to be given options for the future. They're going to have to deal with this kind of scary billionaire thing. I don't think that's too hard to deal with. It is going to be an election fight, though. Here is Labor wanting to give tax subsidies to build these new industries, which, if it works, could be an amazing future for Australia. If it doesn't, it could be a colossal waste of money, and both could be true.
Patricia Karvelas is the host of ABC Radio National Breakfast, Q&A on ABC TV, and the Party Room podcast. This episode was produced by Nell Whitehead and Bridget Fitzgerald. Audio production by Sam Dunn. Our supervising producer is David Cody. I'm Sam Hawley. ABC News Daily will be back again on Monday. Thanks for listening.